General Hospital spoilers reveal that the atmosphere had shifted in Port Charles, the air thicker, the shadows longer, as if the city itself could feel the return of something monstrous. For Jason. But nothing could have prepared him for what he and Jocelyn unearthed, an answer so vile and twisted, it redefined everything they thought they knew. The revelation arrived in fragments, encrypted medical logs, financial transactions tied to phantom corporations, experimental drug shipments routed through abandoned clinics in Eastern Europe. Buried in a classified transmission intercepted by Jocelyn's contact at WSB, they heard the unmistakable voice. Cold. Calculated. Alive. Faison. Faison's existence had always haunted Port Charles like a specter of madness, manipulation, and death. For Jason, he had been both enemy and predator, an obsessive puppet master who once used Britt, terrorized Lisel, and tormented Anna. But now, his name was not a relic of old crimes. It was the signature behind something current, living, and sinister, a covert network that ensnared Britt, Professor Dalton, and Jen Sidwell. None of them had known the full truth. Or if they had buried it so deep within themselves that even they were prisoners of it. Jason had begun to suspect something was off when Britt's behavior changed, not in the surface-level emotional ways others might have missed, but in the rigid pattern of her routines. The nightly injections, the veiled references to him, the moments she looked over her shoulder even in the safety of her own apartment. Britt had never been easy to read. But now she was beyond guarded, she was haunted. And now Jason knew why. Her father, thought to be dead, had never left her side. He had simply shifted the game, rewriting the rules and moving his pieces from the shadows. Jocelyn, young yet sharpened by her experiences, refused to let the revelation paralyze her. But even she could feel the tremor in the truth. The name Faison was more than a villain in her mother's stories. It was a curse passed down through generations, a curse that now threatened to consume Britt and everything Jason had fought to protect. The connection was clear. Britt's mysterious new boss. The man whose voice she responded to with a mixture of fear and reverence, was not merely a financier or rogue scientist. He was the architect of the entire operation. The mind behind the experimental serum Britt injected each night, a substance Jason now believed was tied to a radical, highly secretive treatment for Huntington's disease. Faison had always been obsessed with control, of bodies, of minds, of fate itself. Now he sought to rewrite genetic destiny, and he was using his own daughter as both subject and servant. But the science was only part of it. The psychological hold he had over Britt ran deeper. It wasn't just loyalty or fear. It was obsession, Faison's trademark. The same compulsion that once drove him to stalk Anna now held Britt in its grip, not just as a daughter, but as a legacy. And Jason realized, with a growing unease, that he too was being drawn back into Faison's twisted world, not as a target this time, but as a variable in a much larger experiment. The presence of Dalton and Sidwell in the same web confirmed the scale of what they were facing. Dalton, the charming and enigmatic professor with a penchant for biochemical research, had vanished from public view months earlier, rumored to be working on neurological manipulation projects. Sidwell, a financier whose ties to black market pharmaceutical labs were whispered about but never proven, had recently funneled millions into an unregistered company under Britt's name. The pieces clicked together in Jason's mind. Faison had assembled a new order, and each member played a role in his revival. This wasn't just about curing Huntington's. It was about transcending mortality. Jason felt the old fire return, the instinct to protect, to strike first before the enemy gained ground. But this time, the battlefield wasn't only physical, it was psychological, emotional, and moral. How could he fight a ghost who had become a god in the eyes of his daughter? How could he confront Britt with the truth when she might already know, and accept it? For Jocelyn, the revelation opened a chasm of fear and doubt. She had grown up in the aftermath of the chaos Faison caused, seen the grief etched in Carly's face, the silence in Sunny's eyes whenever the name was mentioned. To know that he was still alive, pulling strings again, meant that no one was truly safe. Not her. Not Britt. Not Jason. And worst of all, it meant that everything they thought had been buried with Faison's death was still festering beneath the surface. As the truth settled into their bones, Jason and Jocelyn both understood what came next. This wasn't just a matter of uncovering a conspiracy. It was personal. Deeply, inescapably personal. Jason had been dragged back into a war he thought was over, and Britt was the heart of it. The woman he had come to care for was more than a victim, she was both a key and a lock. And if Faison was truly alive, he would not rest until she became the perfect successor to his empire of madness. Jason's obsession returned with a vengeance, not just to destroy Faison, but to save Britt from becoming what her father had designed her to be. The more he learned, the more he feared that she was slipping, not because she wanted to, but because she saw no other way. The nightly injections, the late-night calls, the secret lab visits, all signs of a woman at war with her blood, her mind, and her legacy. And Jason couldn't watch her drown in it alone. Jocelyn, too, was shaken, but determined. She had found her voice, her courage, in the darkest corners of the truth, and now she would use them. Whatever Faison was planning, she would help Jason stop it, even if that meant exposing people she once trusted, even if it meant watching Britt fall apart. This revelation was not just a twist in the story. It was a fracture in the foundation of everything they knew. Faison was alive. Britt was compromised. Jason was consumed. And Jocelyn was caught in the storm. Some obsessions never die. They evolve. They adapt, and they wait. Faison had waited in silence, manipulating from the shadows, crafting a new empire through his daughter, cloaked in science and seduction. And now, as the truth emerged, Jason and Britt stood on the edge of something terrifying, not just a resurgence of evil, but a transformation of it. This was no longer about death or revenge. It was about inheritance. It was about bloodlines. As the days ahead unraveled, the stakes would rise, the lines between love and manipulation would blur. And every choice Jason and Britt made would carry the weight of Faison's return. And through it all, Jocelyn would watch with growing horror. Knowing that the monster who haunted their past had never truly left, and that the real battle was just beginning. Lisel's trembling confession that Caesar Faison was still alive detonated like a psychological bomb, shattering any illusion that the past had been buried or defeated. She had held on to the secret for so long that it had become a part of her, an invisible cage forged from guilt, regret, and a mother's desperate need to protect what little remained of her fractured world. But now, in the face of mounting evidence, Jason's growing obsession, and Britt's unexplainable behavior, the truth could no longer be contained. Faison was alive, and his presence wasn't just a lingering ghost of history, it was an active force reshaping the present. For Lisel, the revelation wasn't simply a factual admission, it was the beginning of an unraveling that she had fought to delay for years, one she knew would end in madness, violence, and unspeakable betrayal if left unchecked. And yet, she still clung to the irrational hope that by keeping Jason grounded, by preventing him from going to Europe, she might still rewrite the ending. What Lisel understood better than anyone else was that Faison had never needed to be physically present to control a situation. His influence was viral, intangible yet deeply invasive, corrupting from a distance with psychological finesse. He didn't have to appear in Port Charles to wreak havoc, he had already found ways to exert his will through others, through Britt, through Sidwell, through the research trails and underground laboratories stretching across European borders. The evidence was everywhere if one knew where to look. Jason, with his hunter's instincts and impenetrable sense of loyalty, had begun connecting the dots, and that alone made Lisel panic. Because Jason wasn't just getting close to the truth, he was about to walk into a trap so precisely constructed it made Faison's past games look like child's play. Lisel had known for some time. She had received cryptic messages, intercepted obscure biochemical research reports, and uncovered faint traces of Faison's distinctive pattern of manipulation embedded in Britt's behavior. She had even traced the origin of a particular neurological treatment Britt had been injecting to a facility long thought to be decommissioned, a facility that had once served as one of Faison's many hideaways. She had kept it all to herself, holding it tightly like a cursed relic, afraid of what might happen if it were ever exposed. Because Faison had become more than a man. He had become an idea, a metastasizing presence that infected everything it touched, including her daughter. Her silence hadn't been cowardice, it had been a calculated choice. Lisel believed that if she could contain the truth, she could contain the fallout. But containment is a temporary illusion, and the moment Jason began asking the right questions, that illusion splintered. She saw it in his eyes, the relentless resolve, the cold precision with which he pursued every lead. Lisel recognized the signs because she had once seen the same obsession in Faison. That was the most terrifying part. Jason, in his effort to protect Britt, was becoming like the man he hated, singular in focus, blind to danger, and willing to sacrifice everything for someone he loved. That was why Lisel couldn't let him go to Europe. She didn't care if he hated her for it, didn't care if he called her a liar or manipulator. What mattered was preventing him from stepping onto that soil. From walking into a territory where every street corner, every lab, every contact could be a pawn in Faison's game. Lisel knew Europe was no longer neutral ground. It was a battlefield soaked in silence and shadows, where Faison's reach extended through back channels of biotech networks, experimental gene labs, and rogue intelligence contacts. Jason would be outmatched, not by strength, but by psychology. And she feared that the emotional strings Faison could pull through Britt would be the most lethal of all. There was also the deeper, more private terror Lisel couldn't shake, that Britt herself might not want to be saved. That her daughter, broken and desperate for connection, had willingly re-entered her father's orbit. Faison had always possessed a warped, magnetic pull, and Britt, carrying the weight of Huntington's disease and years of abandonment, might have been vulnerable enough to mistake his return for salvation. If she had already committed to his cause, then Jason's arrival wouldn't save her, it would turn her against him. Lisel's heart clenched at the thought. She had already lost so much to Faison's madness. She couldn't lose Britt too. She couldn't lose Jason. She couldn't watch another person she loved fall into that abyss. That's why she crafted her resistance in layers. She didn't simply say, "Don't go." She engineered a narrative of danger and misinformation. She spoke of fake attacks, of false leads, of data trails that didn't exist. She leaned on Jason's protective instincts, framing her warnings as concern for Britt, for his safety, for Port Charles. But Jason wasn't easily manipulated. He heard the tremor beneath her words. He saw the hesitation, the flicker in her eyes when he asked about Britt's condition. And he knew. Not everything, but enough. Enough to know that something huge, something catastrophic, was being hidden. Lisel understood she was losing control. Every word she uttered, every desperate argument she made, only drove Jason further toward the truth. And she could feel the gears shifting again. The storyline careening toward another collision with Faison's legacy. This time, however, it wasn't about Anna or Sunny or the WSB. This time, it was about blood, about parenthood and inheritance. About whether people born into darkness could escape it, or if they were doomed to reenact it generation after generation. What Lisel hadn't counted on was the emotional convergence now occurring between Jason and Britt. Their bond was deepening, quickly, dangerously, and irrevocably. It was no longer just about protection or affection. It was an emotional dependency, a mutual recognition of damage, trauma, and longing. They saw in each other the things they hated about themselves and clung to each other because of it. Lisel knew from bitter experience that Faison would exploit this. He would use Jason's emotions to manipulate Britt, and vice versa. He had done it to Anna. He had done it to her. And now, it was happening again, this time with newer, more volatile players. The story was changing. What began as a standard pursuit of answers had evolved into a nightmarish unraveling of identity, purpose, and connection. Britt, who once rebelled against her father's legacy, was now being molded by it. Jason, the eternal protector, was being drawn into a psychological trap that Faison had likely designed long before Jason even realized what was happening. And Lisel, who thought she could control the narrative by suppressing it, was now a prisoner of it, watching as the dominoes she tried to prevent from falling collapsed one by one. In the end, her confession wasn't a moment of catharsis. It was a final act of desperation. The last breath of a woman who knew she had already failed. Faison's return wasn't just shocking, it was surgical. It proved that even in absence, he remained the most dominant force in their lives. Lisel's fear, her secrecy, her attempt to hold the line, none of it had stopped him. Because the truth was, Faison didn't need to be alive to destroy them. He just needed them to believe he still mattered. And now, thanks to the perfect orchestration of fear, love, and loyalty, he did. Lisel's attempt to stop Jason was never just about protection. It was about postponing the inevitable. Because once Jason stepped onto that plane, the story would no longer be containable. The world would know Faison had returned. Britt's choices would be exposed, and Lisel would be forced to answer for every secret she kept. And perhaps the cruelest part of all was knowing that despite her efforts, despite the years of silence and sacrifice, she had only delayed the pain, never prevented it. The obsession had returned. The madness had mutated. And now, with her confession hanging heavy in the air, Lisel could only wait for the next move in a game she never really escaped. Faison's re-emergence as the mastermind behind the recent wave of terror rewrites everything thought to be resolved in Port Charles, dragging old nightmares into the present with renewed vengeance. What once felt like fragmented paranoia, Britt's secret injections, Sidwell's covert pharmaceutical experiments, Dalton's disappearance into the shadows of Europe, have all begun to converge under one horrifying truth: Faison is alive, and he is orchestrating a new symphony of madness. But what amplifies the danger beyond comprehension is the growing speculation that Faison is not acting alone. Whispers in encrypted transmissions, suppressed WSB intelligence, and Lisel's reluctant admission all point to the involvement of another figure cloaked in shadows, Victor. If both Faison and Victor are operating from behind the curtain, manipulating events with surgical precision, then what Port Charles is facing is not just a return of evil, it's an evolution of it. The idea of these two men, each steeped in histories of cruelty, obsession, and control, aligning forces is more than disturbing, it's apocalyptic. Faison, with his unrelenting psychological games and need for dominance, represents chaos born from fixation. Victor, with his strategic mind and thirst for control over destiny and bloodlines, symbolizes order imposed through fear. Together, they are not merely tormenting individuals, they are altering reality itself. The strange experimental protocols, the neurological injections, the subtle changes in behavior among their pawns like Britt and Sidwell, all point toward a greater blueprint being executed step by step. This isn't random. It's a new doctrine of control and reshaping identity. This is one of the most twisted obsessions to ever take root, and it's growing bolder with each revelation. What becomes clear is that these aren't isolated incidents, they're interconnected chapters of a terrifying narrative still being written. If Faison is manipulating Britt under the pretense of paternal affection while using her body for experimentation, then Victor may be the one funding the infrastructure behind it. Protecting the science, enabling the secrecy. It explains the precision of every movement, the flawless cover-ups, and the illusion of autonomy that characters like Britt or Dalton think they possess. And the more Jason investigates, the more he finds himself staring down not just one ghost, but two. Faison and Victor are building something monstrous, a union of madness and method. Terror and tact, and the world around them is slowly but surely becoming their laboratory. This is not about revenge anymore. It's about legacy. Both men have long tried to manipulate their children, their bloodlines, their enemies, into pieces on a board they designed. Now, with Britt trapped in emotional and biological servitude, and Jason being lured into a psychological trap, the obsession is no longer limited to individuals. It's systemic. It's generational. It's spreading. The idea that Faison and Victor are working together reframes the entire canvas of current events. Every strange behavior, every lie, every shadowy death or disappearance now becomes a deliberate note in their orchestrated symphony of control. This alliance proves that Port Charles is not just under threat, it is being studied, bent, and reprogrammed. And this proves something even more terrifying: the obsession isn't fading. It's mutating. The new wave of horror isn't just a callback to the past, it's the next phase of it. The obsessions of Faison and Victor have merged into something neither of them could have achieved alone. They are targeting not only individuals but the very structure of identity and trust. They are playing long games with people's bodies, minds, and relationships. Every secret that comes to light, Lisel's hidden knowledge, Britt's quiet compliance, Sidwell's underground funding, only confirms how calculated it all is. The story is no longer about survival. It's about submission. About the ability to maintain clarity in a world being slowly rewritten by two men whose ideologies are feeding into each other. Faison fuels Victor's desire for engineered order. Victor empowers Faison's thirst for emotional chaos. Together, they have created an empire of quiet torment. And what's most frightening is how deeply rooted it already is. Jason's attempts to stop this madness will not be a rescue mission, they will be a war against a disease of obsession that has already infiltrated the people he's trying to save. Lisel's confession was only the beginning, a crack in a mirror that now reveals a monstrous reflection. And if these two ghosts continue to move unseen, unchecked, then the story will keep writing itself, chapter after chapter of agony, deception, and darkness. The idea that Faison and Victor are standing side by side at the edge of this madness is not just a twist, it is the defining shock of this era. And the worst may still be yet to come.